Hello, and yes, this is that. I sounded hungover there. This is Raw Sport Weekly, our 8th F1 only special episode, like our last Jedi, if you will. And as you can see, we are doing this at a time when obviously for work students a lot of essays and exams. So apologies for my bird's nest on my head and my disheveled appearance. This is what deadlines do to you. But I am your Raw head of sport, Raw 12:51 AM's head of sport, Josh Sim, of the Warwick University Student award-winning student radio station. This is, if you see how jumbled my intro is, this is a sign of what's to come. But thank you so much for listening or watching along. I know this episode's coming a little later, just because of deadlines. We've had to sort of reshuffle the recording schedule around. And yeah, so obviously look at the video description, subscribe, like the video, subscribe to the channel, notification bell, all that kind of stuff. If you'd like listening to or watching this video, and if you like listening to the podcast, subscribe to the podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. And then in the video description, it's all our social media links, the link to the podcast, all that kind of stuff, F1 Fantasy League, etc. Anything to plug? On Saturday, our last recording, myself, Joe Spagnoli, who you'll see in just a bit, and Ben Parkinson, our deputy, we went through the European Super League and kind of combed over it for an hour and 50 minutes. So if you were on the edge of your seat waiting for a Super League response from any of us, that's where you'll find it. It's out there on YouTube and podcast. Obviously, again, that was also delayed because of the social media boycott that took place and was carried out by many sporting organizations, and we also did it as well. And so, yeah, and also thank you to those who made the last F1 special. I think it's in our top 5 most viewed YouTube videos, the last F1 recording. So if I remember correctly, the one previous to that is like our most listened to or second most listened to podcast. And then the last one is now in our top 5 most viewed YouTube videos. Hasn't translated to the podcast this time, but still, it's really good viewing figures. Not that we care about figures, viewing figures, but that it shows that obviously there are people who obviously like or listen to what we're talking about F1 and enjoy it. So thank you so much, and hopefully you'll enjoy this one. We will be talking about, as the video description says, welcome back to the Hamver bot podium. Welcome back to Romain Grosjean, as we'll discuss later. And obviously we'll preview Spain as well. But we'll start with Portimao. And to do that, to recap that, and we'll keep it shorter than usual, we have Joe Spagnoli's with me. Joe, how are you?
I'm good. Suggestion, Josh, that I just thought of on account of the fact that your current state is already turning this podcast into a car crash, which is a title suggestion we've had before. Considering car crash, and we talk about him every week, petition to rename this the Mazapod.
The Mazapod. That would be a 180 from our... Actually, no, a 360 from one of our usual content, maybe.
Just stick your alkali under the Raw Sport logo.
Yes. Yes. You really caught me off guard because I don't really know how to respond. I'm just going to introduce Tom Loubreyes, who's back. I probably butchered his last name, but he's back as well. He wasn't here last week, but he's been on regular now. Obviously from Warwick F1 Society as well. So very happy to have him. Tom, how are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here once again. Sadly, I missed out last week, but happy to talk about more Formula One this week.
Yeah, I'm so sorry because I don't think we got the exciting Grand Prix in Portugal that maybe we all sort of hoped for to talk about. But let's go through it. We are going to start with Portimao, and here are the results. For the podcast listeners, I will read it out, the top 10 very quickly. Although we sort of alluded to it, the top 3, Bot, Lewis Hamilton came first, Max Verstappen second, Valtteri Bottas third. Behind them, Sergio Perez came fourth. So sort of the usual top 4 we'd sort of expect, maybe. Lando Norris came in fifth. Again, underlining what a great season he's having so far. Charles Leclerc in 6th. Esteban Ocon in the Alpine in 7th. He headed his teammate, Fernando Alonso, who came 8th. Daniel Ricciardo in the 2nd McLaren came 9th. And Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri got finished up the top 10. So where do we begin? I guess we'll start with you, Tom. Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas. Not a surprise. Maybe a surprise that we haven't had that podium this season so far, but we had it. And it's fair to say the action between the three largely took place in the first phase of the Grand Prix. Also because we had a safety car as well. But otherwise, those three were just a distance ahead of everyone else throughout the race.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Portimao Grand Prix, most of the highlights came in the first few laps, obviously, with the Raikkonen incident. But it's an interesting race still to unpack, seeing as though Hamilton, without the best qualifying, obviously qualifying behind his teammate in 2nd place, still being able to win it out in the end, as you kind of expect Hamilton to do week in, week out now. It's become the norm as he tries to get his 100 Grand Prix soon. But yes, they're just far ahead from the rest. Even Perez in that 2nd Red Bull was nowhere to be seen. Hamilton, Bottas and Verstappen is now officially, I believe, the most seen podium in Formula One history. So yes, obviously, we're used to seeing those three at the front, but hopefully Verstappen will put out a fight, even though I think he'll be quite disappointed with Portimao, seeing as though Red Bull should have been stronger than it was. So obviously a bit disappointing for him, as Hamilton once again extends his lead in the championship. But it's really interesting to see next race in Spain what can happen. And I think it's sadly, as we saw Verstappen and Bottas pit right at the end to get fastest lap, I think it shows how much they dominate, that they're able to go and pit again to try to get that extra fastest lap point. They are just way ahead of the rest of the midfield, of the rest, and hopefully next year it'll be a bit closer, but still a great race by Hamilton. Really seemed in control, and let's look forward to Spain now.
Yeah, I can agree with being hopeful for Spain at least. And Joe, it just seemed like Mercedes were just never really troubled. I mean, Lewis obviously had to make up some ground, obviously because Verstappen got ahead of him after the Kimi Raikkonen safety car period had finished, and then he got past Verstappen, and then he got past Bottas a few laps later, and that was it for Lewis Hamilton pretty much. And then with regards to Valtteri Bottas, obviously Verstappen managed to get ahead of him after the pit stops, and then Bottas, if we take team radio as its word, he had power issues. So in the end, just the way it just rolled out, Mercedes weren't really challenged, to be honest.
They had the best car this weekend, probably for the first time this year. I was actually quite surprised by how poorly the Honda shod cars, both the Red Bull and the AlphaTauri, were doing with putting that power down. Of course, the last corner at Algarve is a very long, sweeping right-hander where you're on full throttle the whole time. But the corner before that is a very odd camber, sort of long hairpin at the top of a hill. And both AlphaTauri and Red Bull seem to be really struggling to get out of there. Verstappen looked very unstable. It was actually that lack of grip that allowed Hamilton to get through, but you can't take away from just how well Lewis Hamilton performed that afternoon. His move on Bottas, maybe Bottas went a little defensive into turn one, but just leaping around the outside. It's one of the many reasons why I love this track, and I really enjoyed this race as well, despite it being a little bit more formulaic than the others. But yeah, they are a long way ahead of the rest of the field, Mercedes and Red Bull. Anyone who's predicting a new winner in 2021, like we got two new ones last year, maybe don't count your chickens too soon, because it's looking pretty difficult to topple Mercedes and Red Bull so far this season.
Yeah. There's not really much to add there, I think. And indeed, in terms of analysis, there's not really much to say about the podium finishes, because that's just how it ended up. As Tom said, it was quite comical to see Perez, then Bottas, and Verstappen all pit to go for fastest lap. I guess that was sort of that sort of just was a microcosm of the race as a whole, just as how far back everyone was. Just to talk about Sergio Perez, I think the thing he was sort of that involved in that attracted the most attention involved one of the Haas cars, and of course we're talking about Nikita Mazepin, in terms of Mazepin getting blue flags and then making it very difficult for Perez to overtake. I believe Perez had locked up his tires at one point, and obviously a lot of time lost. Who wants to talk? I mean, Mazepin then later said, the team didn't tell him in time about the blue flags, but he also took some responsibility. But not full responsibility, as what my explanation seemed to suggest. Tom, or actually no, I want to hear Joe's opinion on this. Mazepin, blue flags, and Perez. Any thoughts on that little episode?
Well, Nikita Mazepin actually said sorry for the incident afterwards, which is very surprising and very much unlike the other incidents that have blighted him off track in the last year. That's all I'll say. It's just a rookie mistake, kind of what you'd expect. It didn't ultimately change the complexion of the race that too much. I'm glad race control applied the 5-second penalty, seemed about fair. But yeah, I mean, Perez was some distance off the pace, not like Gasly and Albon levels, but he was nowhere near the caliber of Verstappen and on race pace this weekend, and getting mugged by Leclerc off the line. Once that happened, irrespective of whether Perez got through or not, you kind of always got the impression that the podium was out of his reach.
Yeah, it was. It was just it wasn't a great start, and then obviously he managed to climb back up the order from the positions he lost out to the Ferrari. But again, special. I mean, he did win Drive of the Day, I believe. I believe that's what. So he did get that. He did take home that award. I know.
Perez got Driver of the Day.
Yes, he did.
Why?
I believe, and I was going to say, Joe, I was getting to his amazing stint on the medium tires. If I'm right, he did. Was it nearly 50 odd laps or 50 odd laps or something like that? My memory's kind of gone from it, but I believe that's what he did. So maybe it was, a well done for maintaining your tires for that long. I'm not sure, Joe. I do know there was a campaign to get Mazepin Drive of the Day, and evidently that didn't work. So I don't know. But we'll ask Tom about the cars behind those two teams. We'll bunch McLaren and Ferrari together because 5th and 6th, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, sort of makes sense given that those two guys have the most familiarity with their respective cars. And sort of very, by contrast, in different days for their teammates. Ricciardo, obviously, knocked out of Q1 in qualifying, but managed to kind of rescue 9th place. And Carlos Sainz, who had a good qualifying, but poor strategy let him down, I suppose. So, McLaren slightly better than Ferrari this weekend, but overall, I don't know, weekends that they won't remember too fondly for, I guess, if you're looking at collectively as a team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, let's start with Norris. It's performances we've come to expect from him. He's really hit the ground running. You can really see it's his team. At the start of the season, there was a lot of speculation saying right from the start he will be destroyed by Ricciardo, who's a superior driver. It's just not the case. Norris has been on the ball every single race. What a drive from him. Himself also not on the greatest of strategies, but still managed that 5th place. So great job by Norris in comparison to his unfortunate teammate. He was knocked out in Q1. Obviously, it was his fault, not being able to string a good lap together. And I think it's really destroying for Ricciardo in that his confidence was already not the greatest after Imola and after the team order that happened there. So getting eliminated from Q1 must not have been a great feeling. Obviously, he had a decent race, a good race. He managed to pass cars and end up in ninth place in the points, but still behind the Alpines and definitely not where he wanted to be from the start. So very disappointing for him, and I think a lot of pressure will be on him going into Spain to see whether or not he can actually challenge Norris, because right now it doesn't seem the case, and he really needs to get that pace up fast if McLaren wants that third place in the constructors. Moving on to Ferrari. Amazing qualifying session by Carlos Sainz. Really surprised me. Obviously, Leclerc was a bit disappointing, but points are obviously given on a Sunday, even if we sprint races Saturday too now. But I think Sainz really did well on the Saturday, just can't convert it yet. I mean, it's also because he's new to the team, wasn't on the greatest of strategies, but I think he had a similar strategy to Norris, who managed to do well. So obviously it's still learning for him. It's only his his third Grand Prix with the team, so obviously a lot to learn. And Leclerc, as you can expect, I think one of the greatest talents on the grid, had a very decent start and really kind of managed his tyres well and managed the race well. So I think it'll be an interesting battle between McLaren and Ferrari, even though I still have McLaren ending up on top, because I believe Ricciardo, once he gets used to that car, will really be in for like good points, challenging for best of the midfield every race, hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully, that battle scene will seemingly continue, and I'll drop the constructors standings up in a little bit as well. Joe, I imagine this will be brief. I don't imagine you learn anything new about those two teams, because they sort of had they sort of finished roughly. I mean, obviously disappointing from Ricciardo and Sainz, but other than that, it was sort of nip and tuck. Really, it was sort of what we expected.
I mean, Sainz's race was spoiled for me more on tyres than anything else. You can kind of blame Ferrari as a team for that. What a surprise. But also he could have managed them a little bit better. Again, he hasn't quite put a full weekend together. However, relatively speaking, I'd say he still had a better weekend than Ricciardo. That Q1 performance, just not good enough. What I'd say about both teams is that it's not just that they were a long way away from Mercedes and Red Bull this weekend. It's that it seemed like the other midfield teams who were really letting us down, in particular Alpine, raised their game this weekend. You could also make the same argument about Aston Martin, in much the same way the Mercedes, which has been hampered in the corners because of their low rake. The Aston Martin's got the same problem. It looked like, as with the Mercedes this weekend, the Aston Martin wasn't too badly affected by it. Of course, Vettel making Q3 for the first time with the team. But in the race, they actually fell off quite a bit, and it was owing to a couple of, a damage limitation performance from Sainz and a recovery drive from Ricciardo was one of the many reasons why they didn't end up getting any points. I wouldn't say Algarve was an accurate representation of the pecking order, but with the exception of AlphaTauri, the other mid-table teams managed to up their game, especially Alpine. So Ferrari and McLaren didn't really have dominance over the midfield, which is interesting to see. Although, as Tom's kind of alluded to, I don't think it's going to be representative of the rest of the season.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Alpine, actually. That was my next question. Ocon in 7th, Alonso in 8th, the most competitive, arguably, those two drivers have been all season so far. I think they got upgrades to the floor of their cars, I believe. So came in obviously looking to improve significantly on on their past two results. And pulled off some really, had the speed and the capability to pass Ricciardo and Gasly, sort of rivals in that midfield battle. Just really, an impressive sort of weekend from them, particularly from Esteban Ocon, who all weekend looked consistently really good.
Yeah, I didn't know you were coming to me, but yeah, Ocon is, for me, he's been handily the better performer of those two so far. Let's just ignore Bahrain qualifying. I feel like that was very anomalous. And while I do need to credit Fernando Alonso, he was probably the most exciting driver, if not necessarily the most impressive, during the latter stages of that race. Ocon was just consistent all the way through. The only reason why Ocon wasn't overtaking so many cars was because he didn't need to. He put in a fantastic qualifying. I've seen people saying that he could have done better in Q3. I really don't see how he could. That car's got some pretty serious limitations, not least the power unit being substantially weaker than Mercedes and potentially even Honda on a straight heavy track like Portimao. So yeah, for the first time this season, I do team of the weekend every Grand Prix. Ferrari won my first two weekends. This weekend I gave it to Alpine. I mean, in terms of just an overall good performance from Ocon, finally having, relatively speaking, a decent car under him, and the strategy, those hard tyres, which look so effective in the latter stages of that hot, dry race, really benefiting Alonso. Alpine did really well this weekend.
Yeah. Tom, do you want to weigh in on Alpine and their improvements this weekend?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Joe said it all. I think Ocon has been the better performer out of the two since the start of the season. I mean, he's used to a car, but I think a lot of people were saying, "Oh, Alonso's going to destroy him like he destroyed Van Dorn," but it's just not been the case for me. Ocon has been a standout performer from the start of year, and yeah, as Joe said, I mean, if he ended up seventh just because he didn't have really any cars to overtake, Alonso obviously pulling off the moves on Gasly and on Ricciardo. Alonso, though, I mean, we can say it's a good recovery drive and I think he'll be happy that he managed to pass, obviously, the McLaren of Daniel Ricciardo, and I think that even though Alonso's now older, he's still got the potential, even though he's not, for me, not as quick as Ocon anymore. I still think Alpine has taken a step forward, and hopefully the two drivers will be happy and hoping to continue that into Spain, which in many ways is quite a similar track to Portimao. So hopefully for them, it's the start of something better. And 2 races ago, we'd be saying that Alpine was far behind, but now having beating comfortably the AlphaTauris, I think Alpine can be really happy about what they've achieved. I think they were even surprised by how quick they were. So yes, it's good to see them back at the front where they deserve to be fighting hopefully Ferrari in the coming races.
Yeah. Again, not much to add. Just really solid racing. Ocon was secretly my pick to do well. I don't like doing predictions, so that's why I say secretly. I know, so it seems like we jinx drivers, so that's why I don't voice them. But yeah, really, really good stuff from him. I guess, I mean, Ricciardo and Gasly obviously finished up in the top 10. I don't think there's a lot to talk about their races. Tom, I know
Gasly did really well. Sorry, just quick. Gasly was really impressive this weekend. Again, especially by comparison to Tsunoda, but just consistent from the start. That car was very bad around this track. Gasly was a miracle worker to get that thing into the points.
I think this weekend just illustrated the difference between having been in a car for maybe 2-3 years and being in a car for the first time, because all the drivers, all the teams we sort of talked about, the ones who had more experience with their car finished, I don't want to say considerably further ahead than their teammate, but that's what it seems like in terms of grid position and in terms of timings as well. So, and that applies to obviously McLaren, Ferrari, Alpine, AlphaTauri, Aston Martin, not so much this weekend, but throughout the season, that's what it seemed like, at least. And to an extent, Williams as well. Just quickly, Tom, I know you wanted to shout out Antonio Giovinazzi in the Alfa Romeo, and indeed, he was the lone driver carrying the Alfa Romeo flag because Kimi Raikkonen needed to fix something on the steering wheel and didn't see his teammate and promptly shunted into him or lightly tapped him on the wheel, which wrecked his race. But Giovinazzi had to be honest, I was watching it as well. Like I was watching his position throughout the race as well. It was just very solid for him not to sort of lose any positions, and he just sort of hovered around just the outside of that top 10.
Yeah, I mean, just to quickly go back to that Raikkonen incident, like I cannot believe Raikkonen, such an experienced driver, could do such a thing. Just looking at his steering wheel while he's in slipstream of his teammate on the first lap of a Grand Prix, it seems very such a rookie mistake. So terrible race by Raikkonen, and he's got a lot to be annoyed for. But going back to Giovinazzi, really surprised he didn't get a puncture after that Raikkonen incident. I'm very happy he didn't, because for me, I think Giovinazzi is always going under the radar. He basically gets no coverage by Formula One management, which is the organisation in charge of broadcasting the race. But solid performance. Obviously, ending up 12th with in front of the two Aston Martins, including Sebastian Vettel, who miraculously got the car into Q3. So just a great solid race from him. And I think a lot of people were touting that seat to maybe go to Formula 2 drivers. But I think Giovinazzi has really shown that he can be consistent, and in my view is by far the better Alfa Romeo driver right now. So I think it's just a solid performance for him, something we can expect now that he's been in the car for a couple of years, and I think he'll be happy about his performance, even though with a race like this, where not many major incidents happened, you can't really challenge for points in an Alfa Romeo. But I think I'm happy for Alfa Romeo that they've managed to really, they seem to have this similar pace to Aston Martin, so I'm happy for them. And so I'm really looking forward to see more of Giovinazzi, even though Formula One management probably won't show much of him in the coming season.
Yeah, I have to say, I recently discovered Alfa Romeo's social media channels. I don't ordinarily go to them. It's really good content. Their social media teams are doing a really good job, so I'll give them a shout out. But you mentioned Aston Martin. Obviously, Sebastian Vettel got into Q3. Really good stuff from him. And then in the race, I mean, Lance Stroll was a bit of a non-factor all weekend, so that's why I'm sort of ignoring him. And Vettel, just because the other cars around him had a good weekend, he just slipped down the order in the race. Likewise for George Russell, who, again, 11th in qualifying, really good stuff. And then, again, just slipped down the order because there were faster cars around him. So not much to add there. I think that just the last thing to talk about before we sort of run through the standings real quickly, Mick Schumacher got his is that his first? That's sort of his first overtake, isn't it? First racing overtake in Formula One. I mean, obviously Nicholas Latifi, not the most heralded of F1 drivers on the grid to get it over, but get your first overtake over. But Joe, still, an exciting moment for anyone who's been tracking him, and obviously it'll give him a lot of confidence going into Spain and races beyond.
I think the name alone made it probably the most exciting moment of the last few laps, and good on Nicholas Latifi for messing up into turn 3, making it a hell of a lot easier for Schumacher to get through, just tutorializing overtakes to the young rookie driver. But that's not the important thing here. George Russell had problems throughout the race, as far as I could tell. Latifi did not, by comparison, so it's actually kind of a miracle that Latifi was still behind, because Russell in the race wasn't looking great for pace anyway. But Schumacher this weekend really impressive stuff. It's just such a shame that Haas is such a dog that even when he puts in a masterclass, you're not going to see it. This wasn't quite on that level, but the consistency with which he was faster than Mazepin, combined with the amount he was faster on a weekend where Mazepin wasn't particularly erratic, he was just pretty slow. And I know the Williams is not a great car. I know it's very wind sensitive, which on a track like Portimao with all the elevation changes could well be one hell of a problem. But Schumacher's race pace was really good for what that car is. And I know we're talking about that second Alfa Romeo seat and who will it go to next year. Personally, I still think it could be Théo Pourchaire. But Mick Schumacher is already showing that he does have something. And that's coming from someone who has honestly doubted him ever since he first came into Formula 3. So no excuses from me. One of the best drivers this weekend, and it's just such a shame that car means that no one really saw it.
Yeah, I guess if you watched the timing screen, you got a sense of how much quicker he was than Mazepin. You saw that the 19 seconds become 59 seconds and so on. It just sort of grew and grew and grew. So yeah, no, I mean, we're celebrating a young driver getting their first sort of competitive overtake on a Formula 1 track, which is really exciting. I will run through the driver standings. I'm not going to ask you two about it because I don't think much changed from in terms of the order, but I'll run through it for the podcast listeners. Hamilton leads the championship on 69 points. Get your 69 jokes in now. And there we go. Max Verstappen second for Red Bull on 61 points. Lando Norris third for McLaren, 37 points. Valtteri Bottas fourth on 32 points. Charles Leclerc fifth on 28 points. Sergio Perez sixth on 22 points. And then you have Ricciardo 6 points behind in the McLaren. Carlos Sainz, sorry to say with an Australian accent there. Carlos Sainz is 2 points behind Daniel Ricciardo in the Ferrari. And then to wrap up the top 10, Esteban Ocon in ninth on 8 points, 1 point ahead of Pierre Gasly. And I learned this week that Ocon and Gasly have the sort of rivalry. They don't get on. Apparently their friendship broke down due to some karting rivalry. And so that was fascinating for me to learn. And a bit of a side story there. Joe, you unmuted. Did you want to say something about the Gasly Ocon?
Oh no, I mean I've heard of it before. I question how strong it really is, but I know that of all of the Franco-Monegasque clan of drivers, Ocon's kind of the black sheep. He's the biggest outsider of them. Well, that's partly due to do with his background, I think, because he's by far the least privileged of all of them as well. So it might just be posh boys against, an actual achiever.
I know Tom was weighing in this. I'll just quickly say, me searching the Ocon Gasly thing stemmed from someone I heard talking about how Ocon doesn't get on with many of the drivers, and I sort of then Googled that and found that story. But also found that he had Lance Stroll. Ocon and Lance Stroll apparently very good friends. So there's that as well. Tom, did you want to weigh in on the Ocon Gasly sort of rivalry, if you want to call it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Ocon and Stroll are pretty good friends, which seems surprising, but I don't doubt that Stroll is a nice character away from the racetrack. I think the rivalry stems from the karting days, where apparently Ocon did not pay back a loan the Gasly family gave him, or something along those lines. But it's also, I think, Ocon, having had the privilege to jump on a call with him and other people, is one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. I think for anyone who doesn't know his backstory, he comes from his dad is a car mechanic. He grew up in a bedroom just on top of the garage, and his family sacrificed everything for him to go racing. And so the fact that he's in F1 is such a miraculous feat. And so, I mean, I think Ocon is one of the most down-to-earth sort of people. And I think Gasly is too. I think we've only seen Gasly's side because Ocon has never really talked about this potential rivalry between the two. Only Gasly has. So it would be interesting to see Ocon's side. But I think it's it's a bit harsh to put all the blame on Ocon. Like, I feel a lot of the F1 community is having only seen Gasly's side. And don't get me wrong, Gasly is one of the nicest drivers too, at least it seems. So it's a bit surprising to me that we see such a thing. But who knows? Maybe one day we'll see both of them in a Alpine race suit. Who knows?
A couple of things to take away. Obviously, yes, Ocon, I believe, is still Mercedes driver, if I'm right. He's still managed. So, and obviously Gasly with the Red Bull family. So, 3 years, 4 years down the line, maybe, and assuming, fingers crossed, that those two teams are still fighting each other at the top, maybe we see that sort of rivalry spring to action. Second of all, you sort of name dropped that you were on a call with Ocon, so I'm just going to pick up that name from Esteban that you dropped there. I'm assuming, I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm just assuming this was this one of those like F1 website, when they offer fans to talk to drivers? Was it one of those sort of events?
Yeah. So I got lucky and I managed to jump on a call with him and Fernando Alonso. So yeah, I feel incredibly lucky. That was on the Thursday before Portimao. So yes, and both of them really nice, and so yes, I mean it's made me more of an Alpine fan now. I must admit.
I didn't realize this was recent as well. Wow. Okay. I know they sometimes clip some of those Instagram questions or those questions that fans ask them and put them on Instagram. So now I'm gonna have to go through those videos. And yeah, that's really cool. What was else? There was something else. Yes, that's what I was going to say. You alluded to Ocon's story there. If F1 fans really want an underdog, and again, I'm probably the only F1 fan who's not seen Drive to Survive, so I don't know how much screen time Ocon gets, or Gasly for that matter, to talk about that friendship or lack of friendship rather. But Ocon, yeah, I think I read 10 years ago, his family was living in a caravan or something. And yeah, it's remarkable. He's got into this sport of all sports where money is very much king. We'll run through the constructors very quickly. Mercedes first with 101 points. Red Bull second on 83 points. Then you have a closer battle between McLaren in third, 53 points. Ferrari just 11 behind on 42. Then Alpine has leapfrogged AlphaTauri and Aston Martin on 13 points. AlphaTauri at 9, Aston Martin on 5. So that's how the constructors work. Again, very briefly, Joe, I think just the big thing in terms of constructors was Alpine, obviously, as we've discussed. And and sort of what we previewed in the season preview, this was sort of the battles we sort of expected to see between McLaren and Ferrari, and then Alpine, AlphaTauri, and Aston Martin, respectively, as well.
Yeah, and it's difficult to tell whether Algarve was something of an anomaly or if we're beginning to have things leveling out a little bit. So has the AlphaTauri bit looked a little faster than it actually is? And is the Alpine a little bit better than the first two races would suggest? One thing that the techies have noticed, and I saw it in Bahrain as well, is that the car does look pretty unstable at times. It looks pretty twitchy on the rear. It wasn't so much of a problem at Portimao. I suspect it probably won't be too much of a problem at Catalunya either. I would be surprised if Alpine fell too far away early on in the season. But again, on raw performance, I have to believe what I've seen, and that is that Alpine probably the 6th fastest car, 7th on a bad weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't think there's much to add there. Tom, you saying you managed to be on that call with Ocon and Alonso has inspired me to look up, because Jenny Gao, obviously, if people follow F1, BBC reporter, tweeted out a picture of the pairings for the press conference ahead of Spain, which I think are being held. They were held today, if I'm correct. And some interesting pairings. And the only reason I bring it up is because it was fascinating to me that Mazepin and Sergio Perez were paired together, which I know, obviously, again, the blue flags thing was more. Mazepin's come out and said sorry and all that stuff, so that should be a water under a bridge. But interesting, they've put them together as if to create some sort of, I don't know, rivalry there, some sort of disagreement there. The two Spaniards obviously together, Alonso and Sainz. And yeah, it was very. You talk about the Gasly's, the sort of friendship between the French-speaking drivers, Gasly and Leclerc put together interestingly. and then the 2 Alfa Romeos, which is fun if you check out Alfa Romeo's social media team. So yeah, that just your story just reminded me of that, and I thought that was worth putting up. Joe, you want to say something?
The best pairing here, and I can't believe you haven't mentioned it because the comments are talking about it, Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda. How busy are the censors going to be with their answers?
I mean, I didn't mention it because, you assume they get on. Everyone else, I'm sure everyone else is sort of, you assume get on, but like, I don't know. Maybe there's a story there. But Tom, did you want to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, sure. Two of them I'm looking forward to is firstly Alonso and Sainz. Sainz, obviously, whose idol is Fernando Alonso, being the most successful Spanish driver ever in Formula One, and so that'll be interesting. Certainly, because maybe we'll see some close fighting between Sainz and Alonso, hopefully down the line. And the other one I'm looking forward to is the Daniel Ricciardo Lewis Hamilton one, just because they seem to get on well. I think the mutual respect between the two is quite nice. You've got this odd comment, odd banter between the two, so it's always nice to see that. And it will be interesting to see Ricciardo's answers, because undoubtedly the journalists will be asking him questions about his bad performance last weekend, certainly during qualifying.
Yeah, that is a pairing that, in terms of fan favorites, probably wins that contest, the popularity contest, for sure. So yeah, I just wanted as I said, Tom's story sort of reminded me of that, so I just put that up there. Let's run around the paddock. We didn't get to this last week because it broke 10 minutes after our podcast, which was annoying. But at least we have it now. Canada is out of the current calendar and Turkey is in. As I understand it, I think they take over the exact same dates. I'm not sure. I need to check that one to be sure. But very quickly, Joe, Turkey last year was a lot of fun. Obviously, the conditions sort of helped, the wet conditions. If it is replacing Canada date for date, we're probably not going to get that because June. So how excited are you that we're going back to Turkey because of the unfortunate circumstances around the Canadian Grand Prix?
It'll be interesting to see how the Istanbul Park fares on race day when it hasn't got the grip of your average skating rink. I think last year, a lot of the appeal, especially in free practice, was just what a mess it was, and even the race was kind of crazy as well. So being able to see that fantastic, the four apex left-hander at full speed in these cars in particular, in bone dry conditions, assuming we get them, will be interesting. I'm going to miss Canada. I really like that track. It just works. It's such a simple track, but it always just works. It always delivers a good race. Some of the most exciting in terms of narrative, if not necessarily racing, of the last 10, 15 years. But as a side note, I'm not really a fan of that 1 week trip over to North America anyway. It doesn't seem very sustainable. Of course, if the Miami Grand Prix, as you hypothesized last week, was to be put either just before it or alongside it, that would make sense. It would make me feel a little bit better. But yeah, it's a shame that we're probably going to lose Canada, because I can't imagine they'll reschedule it to October, November. But I am kind of glad that we're not flying the whole Formula One paddock over the Atlantic for just one race.
Of course, what else goes missing is the sort of raft race that all the teams take part in before the Grand Prix. So that's unfortunate that we're not going to get that. Tom, do you want to, is there anything else you want to weigh in on the Turkey-Canada swap?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit like Joe. It'll be interesting to see how Istanbul Park is like in dry, hopefully better conditions. Obviously, Turn 8 is the fan favourite. But I'm also a big fan of going to Canada. I really like Canada. Notably, obviously, being a Jenson Button fan, Canada 2011 brings back good memories. But no, I think I believe Canada has signed an extension though for 3 or 4 years going forward. So it's not as if we're not going to see Canada anymore. I'm happy to see that Formula One and Montreal are committed to keeping that race on the calendar, because I believe Canadian fans are really some of the best fans. Obviously, they've now got Lance Stroll, maybe not the best Canadian driver when you see they used to have Gilles and Jack Villeneuve, but still, it's a shame we won't have it this year, but it does mean Istanbul again, and I think a lot of fans will like that. Seeing as though I doubt Istanbul will become a regular going forwards.
Yeah, you also got Nicholas Latifi's Canadian as well, so double the representation on the grid. And incidentally, Lance Stroll, who obviously had a very good weekend in Turkey last year in the rain, unlikely. It feels unlikely that we're going to get a repeat unless conditions sort of end up being the same. So, but I'm sure he'll be thrilled to go back to somewhere where he's had probably his best weekend ever. Let's talk about the other news that came about, and I'll keep that banner up, was that, Robert Kubica was announced to be testing for Alfa Romeo this weekend, I believe. And then we also get, not for this Grand Prix, for the French Grand Prix, which is in, 4 races time, I think, something along those lines, in the first half of the season, I think. We're getting Romain Grosjean back in a Formula One car in the Mercedes, as promised by Toto Wolff sort of several months ago. Grosjean now taking part in IndyCar. I know I have friends who follow IndyCar and have sort of, reported on how he's been doing. But again, just a feel-good story, really. And I don't think we need to dissect it too much in detail. But Joe, just briefly, excited to have Romain Grosjean back in an F1 car again.
Yeah, it just feels right, and it's going to be, without a question, the best Formula One car he'll have ever driven, which is rather sad. But yeah, I mean, even on a competitive level, I think he deserves a proper send-off, because, you say you've got friends reporting on how he's doing in IndyCar. Relative to some of the other rookies this year, like Jimmy Johnson in particular, he's doing pretty damn well. Like he's been fairly conservative, which is odd for Romain Grosjean, but he's consistent. He doesn't make mistakes. At Barber, he managed it really, really well. Yeah, I'm just happy for him. We're all happy for Romain Grosjean, because no one liked what we saw in Bahrain last year, and I certainly didn't like how sensationalized it was in Drive to Survive, and with all the camera angles after the original accident. It just feels right. And again, Paul Ricard, classic testing track. It'll be nice to see him get one final run out, because even though his motorsport career is far from over, we can be pretty certain he's not going to be in Formula One again.
I mean, I'll be very interested to see, and it's unlikely that they would consider him for a race seat going forward, obviously, but it would be very interesting to see where on the pecking order he would. And I know they're doing this obviously because they obviously promised to, and not for reasons to see him, like test him out for next year or whatever, but like how he would stack up in that car against the likes of, say, George Russell, who's obviously on Mercedes books, or is it Nick De Vries is on Mercedes books as well, isn't he?
So they've got 4 drivers that are either signed or affiliated or whatever. So De Vries and Van Dorn, who are both ex-F2 champions, and then you've got Russell and Ocon. I think it's fair to say that Grosjean's probably below all of those. Not that that's much of an insult, because basically what Mercedes do is they don't grow their own talent. They just poach it from other teams when they let good drivers go. De Vries hasn't got a seat and he's not assigned to any particular program. Sign him up, stick him in our Formula E car. It makes sense.
It's like football in the loan system, or it's like signing free agents and then loaning them out to other teams. Which I mean works for them. Tom, do you want to? I mean, yeah. It's very nice to see Romain Grosjean back in a F1 car. Now he's in a car. I mean, he obviously in that first stint with the Lotus, it was quite a competitive car, and then after that, obviously ending up in the Haas car, obviously must have been tough for him to be at the back of the grid frequently. But now he gets his sort of chance to be in the fastest car on the grid, which is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I think important caveat is sadly, he won't be driving this year's F1 car. He'll be driving the W11 or W10, so two years ago, I think. But I think what's great is that Toto Wolff himself even said it. His crash just wasn't a proper send-off. I mean, okay, he's never won a race, but still he's been a name in the paddock for over a decade now, and so it would never, no one would have thought we'd say goodbye to him in that way. So him coming back, and even more so at his home Grand Prix, obviously he's French. I think it'll mean a lot to him, and you can see it from his reaction on social media. I think he'll really love it, and I think it's so wholesome to see such teams like Mercedes giving this opportunity to Grosjean. I think the whole F1 community is really glad to be able to see that and see him in a F1 car one last time.
Yeah. There was something I was going to say. Oh yeah, thank you for adding that amendment. Duly noted. But also, it says a lot that because I remember obviously at the start of his career, he wasn't a popular driver in the paddock. Certainly, sort of had that sort of mistake-prone tag allocated to him, and then it says a lot that now he's coming back, and a lot of people are excited for that. It seemed like it says a lot about sort of his evolution as a Formula One driver to get to that level, and yeah, it's very cool. Now, so again, some really exciting, some really like happy news, and yeah, I'll probably do it for around the paddock. I don't think there was a whole lot this weekend. Obviously, a week's turnaround. We will jump now into Spain to wrap up. Again, this was always going to be a bit of a shorter episode just because Portimao didn't give too many talking points. We'll jump into Spain. Just bear with me 1 second as I get the sort of circuit up. But back at Catalunya, 66 laps, I think. Yes, 66 laps. I just had to scroll down. Daniel Ricciardo, incidentally, but the fastest lap recorded at the circuit in 2018. Joe, in Catalunya, as a track, are you excited that we're heading here next? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's hard to be excited to be going to a track that we go to every year. Like when we go to Suzuka or Monza or Silverstone, I know they're great tracks, but I'm not particularly excited because it's hardly a novelty. It's not the same excitement that I get when we head over to Portimao. If I may just quickly, I'm not going to go into detail. The amount of people I hear slag off this track saying it's really bad. Firstly, there is no other track in Spain, and you need a Spanish Grand Prix for the market share size alone. There's no other track in Spain that can realistically host a Grand Prix. Other tracks like Jerez are too small. Jarama's dangerous. Aragon, which I do love, is in the middle of nowhere, so good luck getting the paddock over to there. MotoGP have it difficult enough. I think it is genuinely a good all-around circuit, if not particularly exciting, with the one caveat of the final chicane before the last corner, the worst corners in Formula One. There is no need for that chicane whatsoever. They don't use it in MotoGP. And if they're horrible to get around in a Formula One car, something that turns on a dime, imagine how bad they are in a big GT car. And yet they use that for all of them. So yeah, good track, horrendous final corners.
You are for the podcast listeners who maybe have a circuit track map in front of them. Just Google the Spanish Grand Prix. Joe's referring to turns 14 and 15, if I'm correct. And he's nodding, so yes, I assume that is it. But yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, I mean, we obviously have two Spanish drivers on the grid at the moment. Spanish-speaking drivers, we have more than that because Sergio Perez as well. So obviously, Spain has a lot of racing pedigree. It's interesting what you say. I hear sort of same sentiments about Catalunya. I just I don't pretend to have a detailed knowledge of how the sort of safety regulations work at circuits, but I feel like maybe this circuit probably does the best in terms of scoring on that level and surfaces and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's why. But Tom, same question for you. Spanish Grand Prix. I mean, do you have any sort of thoughts about the track? Just feel free to talk about them.
Obviously, it's not the track F1 fans really look forwards to every time. Certainly compared to other tracks nearby. So I mean, the other European tracks, and but I mean, after Portimao, I think we can hope it's as good a race. I mean, Portimao wasn't great, so hopefully that it'll be a bit better. And I completely agree with Joe that final chicane is really bad. Certainly because, as he mentioned, MotoGP just don't have turn 14 and 15, and turn 13 is just such a long, much longer corner, and so it much better prepares you for the pit straight afterwards. I mean, another thing, because this year, due to COVID, F1 cars didn't test here, but tested in Bahrain. F1 teams may have a little less knowledge, little less data on this track, which may help. Obviously, normally testing is that circuit. So when F1 teams come, they already know quite a lot about it. They know how their car will behave, certainly because it's still at the start of the season. So cars haven't necessarily changed that much. But now, first time we're coming to this track this season, maybe let's hope for a good race. I mean, we've had good races here in the past, notably. I think people remember 2016, obviously. I don't think the track is that bad, and I think it's created some great moments. I mean, obviously, Alonso's win in front of his crowd in 2013 is now far behind. In 2013, is far behind us. But let's hope the Spanish drivers, so Sainz and Alonso, will be able to give us a show, because Spain is an important part of the Formula One Canada.
Yep. I'll be honest. My memory of F1 history is quite bad. So when you said 2016, I had to Google it. But yes, I remember now that I Googled it, I do remember two Mercedes drivers obviously collided on the first lap, which, if that happens this weekend, that will make it very interesting to watch. I'm not asking for a repeat, but obviously that would add something on this track that's sort of hard to overtake. And for those who maybe are newer to the sport, the next two races, Spain and Monaco, notoriously going to be quite difficult to overtake. So if you're looking for sort of, I don't know, overtaking as your sort of entertainment on a barometer, it's not going to rank very highly on those. Obviously 2012, come to think of it, was a very exciting race in Spain for Pastor Maldonado winning. That's his shout out for this podcast. But let's run through obviously a week turnaround. I think this is the first sort of double header we've had this season. So quick turnaround for these drivers and teams. Talking about what we're going to expect from teams and drivers. Joe, I mean, I sort of look at the front of the grid. Obviously, Mercedes sort of got one back on Red Bull this past weekend. It'll be interesting to see if Red Bull can sort of have a response to that, or whether this will be the start of Mercedes sort of building their what we might perceive as dominance going forward. Should be an interesting one for those two, for those two teams, that front battle. Then obviously in the midfield, seeing if Alpine's pace is for real, for example, or how is McLaren or Ferrari, who's going to take that next step forward. So there's some interesting stuff to look out for this weekend.
Yeah, Portimao raised a few interesting questions, so it's quite nice that, unlike Bahrain, we may well get some answers within a week or so. I don't think the tracks are necessarily that similar. However, they do share some similarities in terms of like the long pit straight, the braking, which is, to be honest, more stable in Spain than it is in Portimao. And for that reason, I actually think that Mercedes on paper will have the fastest car this weekend. But if we're going to go predictions early, Josh, I do think Max Verstappen is going to pick up his second win of the season, because I can see Red Bull, as they have done a couple of times this season, out-strategizing Mercedes come the race. And the thing is, at Catalunya, yeah, you can overtake, but if you're in the lead and you've got a quick car, you can hold on to it pretty easily as well. This is going to be the first race of this season, really, where, if assuming it stays dry, we're going to see which team really have their thinking caps on when it comes to strategy, because so far this year there have been some worrying signs from Mercedes, as indeed there were towards the end of last season as well.
Just going off last year's results, and again, obviously, cars are slightly different, so don't take this as a carbon copy of what to expect for this weekend. But we got a Hanver-Bot podium, which is good. That suggests we're in for a classic. Sarcasm is intentional there. But we did have, interestingly, and actually the quick thing to mention there is only the top three finished. Everyone else was plus one lap. So that's fun. But Lance Stroll came fourth in the Racing Point last year. Sergio Perez fifth in the Racing Point. So and obviously, and dry conditions as well, sunny conditions. I should say Carlos Sainz came sixth. But the thing I wanted to go there with was, and I know Aston Martin have had their issues, and it sounds unlikely, but I sort of am interested to see if this is a track where Lance Stroll, will do well, and maybe Aston Martin might have sort of an Alpine-esque weekend this weekend, and maybe pull themselves back together. Although, again, as I say it out loud, it does seem unlikely, but maybe it happens. But anyway, Tom, enough of my rambling. What do you expect? I mean, which teams are you sort of looking out for? And as Joe said, we'll do predictions in a bit, specifically podium stuff. But is there any drives of teams you're looking out for this weekend?
Yeah, Josh, I don't want to crush your dreams, but I'm doubtful we'll see an Aston Martin coming in fourth place. I mean, if we do, then that is a classic. I mean, it would be great to see, but sadly, I don't see it happening. Teams to look out for. I mean, obviously, I think we'll talk about it quickly when we make our predictions, but seeing where Red Bull stack up against Mercedes, but I think that will be the case every single race this season. But other teams I'm interested to see is obviously Alpine. We've talked about them, seeing if they can continue on their very good performance last week. Obviously, Alonso, I was going to say in front of the home crowd, but sadly, no crowd or very minimal crowd will be there. So I'll be interested to see Alpine, and in continuation of that, I will also be interested to see AlphaTauri and see how those two teams match up, because AlphaTauri not the greatest weekend in Portimao. Let's see whether they can do better. Obviously, I haven't checked the weather forecast, but Barcelona in May, it's usually already quite hot, so tire degradation will be high. So it'll be interesting to see what happened there. So yes, Alpine and AlphaTauri are my teams to look out for, and where they match compared to one another.
Well, you do. I mean, yes, I should be very clear. I'm not expecting Aston Martin to come fourth or fifth. I'll be very, very clear. There's a chance it might be a good race for them. But what I will say is that whilst, and I am doing our regular segment now, Joe, of me recounting the weather for these races. On the Friday,
we used to call them weather forecasts, Josh.
Sorry, yes. It's yeah. I don't know. It's not really a forecast if I'm not really pointing to anything or have a green screen behind me. It's just me reading a forecast. But on Friday, it's 0% chance of rain, 23 degrees Celsius, mostly sunny and dry. Fine, expected. Sunday, similar, 25 degrees Celsius, chance of rain, nothing. Sunday is interesting. Rain, chance of rain, 40 to 50% at the moment. but unclear when that rain is happening. If you go off the F1 website, rain is expected maybe just a little bit after the checkered flag, so it may not affect it. But obviously, weather's very unpredictable. Rain might come early. We don't know. There may be some droplets towards the end. So should be interesting. And music to the drivers who thrive in the wet, music to their ears, presumably. So again, I'm not expecting Lance Stroll to get 4th or 5th place. But if I'm sort of, it's a bit like my Ocon pick of last week. I'm sort of, maybe if he gets top 7, that'd be a triumph for him and his team. So interesting. But that weather, that sort of polarized between the hot and sunny of the Friday and Saturday and the cooler, maybe rain Sunday, it's an interesting contrast. And it suggests that if we do get rain, whatever happens in qualifying can sort of be discarded for the race. Joe, did you want to say something?
And something I've just remembered as well, not that there's much to cover because we literally have no idea what's going to... It's stupid to make predictions now, but Formula 3 is kicking off this weekend as well, and there's going to be 3 races held throughout the weekend, plus practice and qualifying sessions on the same track. So when this place is dry, there's going to be one hell of a lot of spare rubber put down. There are 30 cars in a Formula 3 field. On a track like that, they're going to be chucking down a lot of rubber and marbles off the line. When it rains, that place is going to be even more unpredictable, assuming it does. Final point, Josh, and I don't want to bring this up every single week, but this is the first of 3 venues that I've predicted that Nikita Mazepin could score points in a Formula 1 car. My Instagram down below is @JoeSpagnoli. My Twitter is @Joe_Spagnoli. So when I inevitably get this wrong, please feel free to send me hate mail. But yes, he is going to be the driver I'm watching out for this weekend. And when I say watching out for, I mean watching out for the back of his car as it goes across the gravel trap.
Yes. What I was going to say in response to that was, one, as we sort of alluded to, rain, and you mentioned a really good point with the F3 season. I believe on F1's YouTube channel, they've sort of put out a bit of an introduction/preview if you're interested in following that. Again, it may or may not rain. Like we're just going off what the weather forecast is now. Obviously, it might change. So don't take it as gospel that it is going to rain on Sunday, to be absolutely clear. And second of all, if Mazepin does score points, there will be a legitimate case for him being driver of the day, and for real, not as a joke. So if that happens, then yes, it is quite likely that he does get driver of the day. So that should be interesting. Are you expecting... I don't know when you were making that prediction, but is that on the basis of there may be some DNFs to look out for in Spain? Or
it was on the basis of 3 things. Number 1, potentially a race of attrition leading to a load of DNFs and Mazepin naturally being elevated up the order. Bold to assume that he wouldn't be one of said DNFs, but Second, because so many of the cars to get into Q3 will have had to go onto soft tyres on a track with high tyre degradation, there's a good chance that the guys who'd started lower back on the mediums and the hards would be able to get themselves through the field and makes up positions in the pit stop window. I can see Haas keeping a car out for ages. If you're going to do a YOLO strategy to potentially ruin your race, I know which driver you can lose less with. However, to be honest, Josh, it was mostly contingent on the Haas not being completely irredeemably terrible this year. So honestly, if Mazepin gets top 15, I will be impressed. If Schumacher gets top 15, I will be impressed. If there is any track where those circumstances are going to happen, I think this is one of them. The other 2 I predicted were Hungary and Zandvoort. But yeah, needless to say, that's not because I think it's going to happen. It's just because in my warped, crazy mind, there is apparently a logic for why it could happen.
So, okay. Well, if that happens, we will definitely be talking about them on the next F1 podcast, and we won't skip over them. And yeah, it's a bit like my Lance Stroll prediction, really. It's not a prediction, but it's sort of an instinct. So to be clear, we're not predicting it. We just think it could happen. So that's a really roundabout of saying it is a prediction, but it's not a prediction. But anyway, let's wrap this up with podium / surprise package predictions, as we seem to customarily do on these shows. Tom, we'll start with you. Top three and a driver outside the top three that may surprise people or may have a really good weekend, a la Esteban Ocon of last weekend, for example, or someone like that.
Yep. Okay. So top three. I'm saying, don't want to say it, but Hamilton for the win, Verstappen second, and Bottas third. It kind of gets annoying to have to say it every week, and you don't want to say it because you think, oh, maybe Perez will be there, but you just realise after races like Portimao, the fact is that your safest bet is to bet on Grosjean. So why Hamilton in front of Max Verstappen is because I think Mercedes will have the faster car going into this weekend, and I think Hamilton will be able to not only get pole but keep the lead going into the first lap. And once he'll have the lead, I'm confident that him and his engineers will have the correct strategy for him to win the race. And as for driver to look out for, driver I think will impress me. I'm hoping it'll be Yuki Tsunoda. Obviously, it's been 2 hard races for him after Bahrain, where he was exceptional. So I'm really looking out for Tsunoda. Obviously, Gasly seems to be the quicker driver for now, but it'll be interesting to see what he can do. And I really think he has the shot for points if he doesn't bin it like he has done, and if he doesn't do any mistakes. So yeah, looking out for Yuki Tsunoda, really hoping he can do well now.
There we go. Tsunoda, as you said, he had never raced at Portimao, if I'm correct. So obviously, yeah, the last 2 races have been a bit of a learning curve for him. But he is hoping the AlphaTauri gets it together. It's sort of a good qualifying car, and it hasn't pulled it together yet in the race. Just strategy misfiring, or just, I don't know, the car not being quite there yet. But fingers crossed that happens. Joe, same thing, really. Podium, top 3. I think you sort of alluded to it a few minutes ago. So, and then a driver outside of them, that 3 to look out for.
Verstappen to win, Hamilton to finish second from pole position, Bottas third, Perez fourth with the fastest lap. Driver to watch out for aside from them, I think all of the Formula 2 drivers, because this is a track that they'll be especially used to. It's not just me saying that Mazepin's going to have a good weekend. I think, Tsunoda and Schumacher, this is a good opportunity for them to do well on a track that they know very, very well. Other driver to watch out for besides them, Fernando Alonso, kind of goes without saying. But the other driver to watch out for, not a Formula 1 driver, in Formula 3, Juan Manuel Correa making his return to full-time racing following the crash that claimed Antoine Hubert's life a couple of years ago. What a recovery he has had to make to get back into an open-wheel car. I will be watching him intently throughout the season because he had one hell of a lot of talent, and he's a braver man than I to get back in a car like that. So yeah, best of luck to him with ART Grand Prix this year in what could well be a very unpredictable Formula 3 season.
There we go. Thanks for giving me a name that I didn't know about. So there we go. And actually, I just looked up last year F2. Tsunoda actually did well in the Barcelona races of F2 last season, and Mick Schumacher as well to an extent. Mazepin had, from what it looks like, he did well in the sprint race, not so much in the feature race. So well, up and down. But it bodes well for Tsunoda potentially if he's able to replicate that F2 form into F1 for sure. I guess I am scared of predictions, but I'm just going to say Ham, Verbot, and then I've already said Stroll, so I might as well die on that hill and say he'll have a good weekend. And inevitably I've jinxed him, but that's great. That'll do it for us, I think. We will be sort of back. I mean, at the moment. And by the way, I didn't say this at the top, but if you want to nominate yourself to be the next head of Raw Sport, you can. Nominations open now. So feel free to do so if you want to take on my role and do it better than me, which is very much achievable of hosting sports shows like this and the Euros and Olympics. And then the elections are next week. And then I think we have a 2-week break between Spain and Monaco. So who knows if I'm still going to be in a host chair by then or not. But anyway, I presume, fingers crossed, there will be some sort of show looking ahead at Monaco for sure. Thank you so much to Tom and Joe for joining me. And yeah, we hopefully, fingers crossed, Barcelona is a good race. And we will see you then, if not beforehand. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast or watching, and have a good rest of your week.